In recent weeks, an incident has unfolded that reveals just how deeply racism is still entrenched in political discourse, and it serves as a chilling reminder of the work still left to be done. The attack launched by Laura Loomer against Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was not merely a personal slight, but rather a public display of racism that lays bare the dangerous undercurrents present in our society. What makes this moment significant is not only the choice of language or the target of the attack, but the way it underscores a larger culture where racist rhetoric is still used as a weapon to silence, demean, and devalue individuals based on the color of their skin. In examining this attack, we are confronted with the uncomfortable truth that racism is not something locked away in the past, nor is it an isolated incident from fringe voices. It remains alive, visible, and influential in the very spaces where democracy should be strengthened. Jasmine Crockett, as a congresswoman, represents not just her constituents but also the growing presence of diverse voices in American leadership. She stands as a symbol of progress, of barriers being broken, and of the promise of representation for communities that have long been excluded from positions of power. And yet, instead of being respected for her service and contributions, she was subjected to an attack that centered not on her policies, not on her legislative work, but on her identity. When a political activist like Loomer resorts to racist undertones and demeaning commentary, it exposes the reality that certain voices in society feel threatened by diversity in leadership. It is not about disagreement with ideas, it is about attempting to discredit and delegitimize leaders based on race, and that is a direct reflection of the persistence of systemic racism in public discourse. To understand the seriousness of this event, we must place it within the wider context of American politics today. There has been a rise in polarizing language, in attacks meant not to engage in debate but to provoke outrage, and in rhetoric that normalizes racism by disguising it as free speech or political criticism. Loomer's words, however, strip away that disguise. They reveal racism in its raw, blatant form, unapologetic, calculated, and meant to degrade. When such language is amplified on public platforms, it does more than attack one individual. It creates an environment where racist thought is legitimized, where bigotry finds an audience, and where those who harbor hate feel emboldened to speak louder and act more aggressively. This is the real danger that Loomer's attack represents. It is not simply a comment directed at Jasmine Crockett, but an assault on the values of equality and inclusion that are supposed to guide democratic society. This kind of exposure matters because it forces us to acknowledge that racism has not disappeared, even in an era when society claims progress. Too often, racism today is subtle, hidden behind coded language or indirect insinuations. But moments like this peel back the layers and show us the truth, that blatant racism still exists, that it can be aimed even at national leaders, and that it is often excused or downplayed by those who wish to maintain the status quo. The attack on Jasmine Crockett is a case study in how racial prejudice continues to be used as a political weapon. By reducing her to stereotypes and insults, Loomer was not engaging in legitimate critique, she was reinforcing the very stereotypes that have been used for generations to silence and belittle black women in positions of influence. This matters not only for Jasmine Crockett as an individual but also for the broader implications it has on public service. When leaders of color are attacked in such a way, it sends a chilling message to others who might consider entering the political arena. It tells them that no matter how qualified they are, no matter how hard they work, they will be judged not by their actions but by their identity. This is the very definition of systemic racism. It is not about one insult or one attack, but about how those attacks reinforce barriers and maintain inequality. In this sense, Loomer's words are not simply a reflection of her personal views, but part of a larger pattern of exclusion and dehumanization that undermines democracy. What we must confront is the role that political discourse plays in shaping public perception. Words matter, especially when spoken in the public arena. When political activists, commentators, or even elected officials engage in racist rhetoric, they are not just expressing personal biases, they are influencing the national conversation. They are giving license to others to adopt similar views, to normalize discriminatory behavior, and to perpetuate the cycle of racism that has plagued societies for centuries. By targeting Jasmine Crockett with such an attack, Loomer has exposed not only her own prejudice but also the cracks in a political system that still struggles to fully embrace equality. And yet, exposure, as painful as it is, also creates an opportunity. When racism is displayed so openly, it cannot be denied or ignored. It forces the public to reckon with uncomfortable truths. It demands accountability from those who might otherwise remain silent. It sparks conversations that challenge complacency and push us to think critically about how far we have really come in addressing racism in politics. The backlash that followed Loomer's attack shows that people are unwilling to tolerate blatant racism without response. But exposure also brings responsibility. It requires leaders, citizens, and institutions to not just condemn, but to take action that dismantles the structures enabling such attacks. The attack on Jasmine Crockett reveals how racism is wielded as a political tool, and it reminds us that representation alone is not enough. It is not sufficient to have diverse voices in leadership if those voices are constantly targeted with hate meant to silence them. The presence of racism in political discourse is a direct challenge to democracy itself, because democracy depends on open, respectful, and equal participation from all its citizens. When racism is allowed to fester, it undermines that foundation and erodes trust in the institutions meant to protect fairness and justice. The exposure we see in this case is therefore both a warning and a call to action, because it shows that the struggle against racism is ongoing, that the forces resisting equality are still strong, and that the voices of those who experience racism firsthand must continue to be amplified and defended. When Laura Loomer directed her racist attack at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the response that followed was swift, powerful, and impossible to ignore. It became clear almost immediately that this was not simply going to be brushed aside as another offensive remark in the crowded world of political commentary. Instead, the backlash erupted with force, fueled by outrage across social media, condemnation from public figures, and a wave of support for Crockett herself. This backlash was more than a reaction to one person's hateful rhetoric, it was a reflection of a collective refusal to allow racism to go unchecked. The magnitude of the response revealed how deeply people are paying attention to the language that shapes politics, and how unwilling they are to accept blatant racism as just another aspect of political debate. The outrage that poured in after Loomer's attack was not confined to Crockett's supporters or even to one political party. It spanned a wide spectrum of voices, including activists, journalists, fellow lawmakers, and everyday citizens who saw the incident as a moment that demanded public reckoning. Social media became the central stage for this backlash, with hashtags trending, thousands of posts amplifying condemnation, and countless users demanding accountability. What this showed is the power of digital platforms to transform individual incidents into national conversations, where silence becomes complicity and where the spread of outrage compels leaders and organizations to take a stand. In this case, Loomer's words ignited anger that transcended political divisions, uniting people in the shared belief that racist attacks should never be normalized. One of the most striking aspects of the backlash was how quickly it turned into a collective defense of Jasmine Crockett's character, dignity, and contributions. Instead of allowing the attack to define her or diminish her credibility, supporters used the moment to highlight her work, her accomplishments, and the barriers she has broken as a Black woman in leadership. In many ways, the outrage flipped. The backlash also extended beyond emotional outrage. Many voices demanded accountability, not only from Loomer herself but also from the platforms that gave her words visibility. Questions were raised about why such rhetoric continues to be amplified, why systems allow racism to circulate unchecked, and what consequences should exist for those who perpetuate hate speech. This reflects an important evolution in how backlash manifests. People are not only expressing anger but also calling for structural changes that prevent such incidents from repeating. The outrage becomes a catalyst for action, sparking conversations about platform responsibility, media ethics, and the standards we hold political commentators to in the public square. This moment also underscored the way backlash functions as a form of collective power. Individuals who may feel powerless in isolation, when combined with thousands or millions of others, create a force strong enough to challenge the spread of racism. Every tweet, post, and statement condemning Loomer's words contributed to a collective outcry that could not be ignored. This is the essence of public backlash. It transforms private anger into a visible, undeniable demonstration of shared values. It asserts that racism is unacceptable not only to the person targeted but to the society that witnesses it. In this way, outrage becomes more than an emotional response, it becomes an act of resistance against the normalization of hate. The breadth of the backlash also reveals something critical about the moment we are living in. People are tired of seeing racist attacks brushed off as jokes, as slips of the tongue, or as unimportant distractions from larger issues. The strong reaction to Loomer's attack showed that audiences are no longer willing to excuse bigotry under the guise of political debate. Instead, they are demanding accountability, demanding that racism be called out explicitly, and demanding that leaders stand on the side of justice. This signals a cultural intolerance for racist behavior that contrasts with the tolerance it often received in the past. The explosion of backlash serves as evidence that progress, while slow, is being made in shifting public attitudes toward zero tolerance for racism. But beyond cultural attitudes, the backlash also carried political implications. It placed pressure on other leaders, organizations, and institutions to take a stance. Silence became a form of complicity, and those who refused to speak out risked being seen as endorsing or minimizing Loomer's behavior. This pressure is a critical component of why backlash matters. It forces individuals and groups to clarify where they stand, which in turn reshapes the broader political conversation. By compelling leaders to either condemn or remain silent, the backlash exposed who is committed to fighting racism and who is willing to ignore it for political convenience. This incident also highlighted how backlash can restore a sense of dignity to the person targeted. Jasmine Crockett did not have to fight this battle alone, because the collective outrage lifted her voice and reaffirmed her right to serve without being diminished by racist attacks. The support she received demonstrated that while racism persists, it does not go unanswered. This matters for the psychological toll that such attacks can take, as well as for the symbolic importance of showing leaders of color that they are not isolated in their struggles. The backlash becomes a form of solidarity, a public declaration that an attack on one is an attack on all. Furthermore, the eruption of backlash exposed the widening gap between those who rely on racist rhetoric to gain attention and those who reject such tactics as corrosive to democracy. Loomer's attack may have been intended to provoke outrage, but the scale and intensity of the response revealed that her words carried a heavy cost. Instead of silencing or undermining Jasmine Crockett, the incident fueled a surge of visibility and support for her, while Loomer herself became the focus of criticism and condemnation. This reversal illustrates the risks faced by individuals who rely on hate to gain relevance. The backlash can not only drown out their voices but also damage their credibility in the process. The collective outrage also serves as a mirror, reflecting back the values that society wishes to uphold. By uniting in condemnation, people affirm that racism has no legitimate place in political discourse. They showed that while racist attacks may still occur, they will not be met with indifference. They will be called out, resisted, and transformed into moments of reckoning that reveal both the persistence of hate and the strength of collective resistance. The backlash following Loomer's attack was more than noise, it was a declaration, a visible and undeniable force that spoke louder than the attack itself and ensured that racism would not pass unnoticed. The attack on Jasmine Crockett and the backlash that followed do not exist in isolation. They are part of a much larger struggle that has spanned decades and continues to shape the present day, the broader fight for respect and equality. At its core, this incident is about more than words exchanged in the public arena. It is about how racism, discrimination, and inequality persist in society and how every incident of hate serves as a reminder of the ongoing battle to create a world where dignity is not conditional and respect is not withheld based on race, gender, or background. When Laura Loomer targeted Crockett with racist remarks, it was not just an attack on one person, it was a reflection of a larger system where those who dare to break barriers are met with hostility intended to push them back into silence. It is within this wider context that the fight for equality must be understood, because moments like these are symptomatic of deeper structural issues that extend beyond individual exchanges. Respect is one of the most basic human needs, yet it is the very thing that people of color, and particularly black women in positions of power, are so often denied. Jasmine Crockett, as an elected leader, has earned her position through merit, through service, and through the trust of her constituents. And still, she faces attempts to strip away her credibility and her dignity through racist insults. This denial of respect is not accidental, it is intentional. It is rooted in a long history of demeaning black women, of using stereotypes to undermine their authority, and of sending the message that they do not belong in the spaces of influence they occupy. The broader fight for equality is therefore not just about gaining access to positions of power, but about demanding the full respect that should accompany them. This fight has unfolded across generations, from the battles against segregation and Jim Crow laws to the ongoing struggle against systemic racism in education, housing, criminal justice, and employment. Every era has its defining incidents that reveal how far society still has to go, and the attack on Jasmine Crockett is one such moment. It illustrates how even when barriers are broken, racism does not simply disappear. Instead, it adapts, taking new forms but still carrying the same goal of exclusion and control. Loomer's attack reflects the persistence of these patterns. It shows that respect is still withheld, that equality is still incomplete, and that progress must be defended at every step. The fight for equality is also about narratives, about who gets to shape the story of leadership and who is silenced. When a black woman in Congress is targeted with racist rhetoric, the aim is not only to insult her but to frame her identity as incompatible with authority. This is why the broader struggle requires vigilance in protecting the narratives of those who are attacked. It is not enough to condemn racism, we must also uplift the voices and stories of those who are targeted, ensuring that their identities are not reduced to stereotypes or insults. In the case of Jasmine Crockett, the broader fight means highlighting her achievements, her advocacy, and the communities she represents, so that the attacks lose their power to define her. Respect and equality also intersect in the way society responds to these attacks. Outrage alone is not sufficient if it does not translate into lasting change. The fight is about creating systems where racist rhetoric carries consequences, where discriminatory behavior is not tolerated, and where respect is enforced through accountability. Without such measures, attacks like Loomer's will continue to occur, not as isolated missteps but as deliberate attempts to perpetuate inequality. The broader struggle, therefore, requires both cultural and structural shifts, cultural in terms of how society views and responds to racism, and structural in terms of the policies and institutions that either reinforce or dismantle discrimination. It is also crucial to acknowledge that the fight for respect and equality is not just about responding to racism after it occurs. It is about building a society where respect is foundational, where equality is embedded into every aspect of public and private life, and where individuals are valued for their contributions rather than diminished by prejudice. This proactive vision is what separates temporary outrage from long-term progress. It means investing in education that dismantles stereotypes, in media that portrays diverse leadership with integrity, and in policies that ensure equal opportunities for all. Without these measures, society remains reactive rather than transformative, addressing symptoms without challenging the root causes. The attack on Jasmine Crockett also highlights how respect and equality are linked to representation. Representation matters, but it is not enough if it exists within an environment where those who represent marginalized groups are constantly subjected to racism and hostility. True equality requires not just the presence of diverse leaders but the conditions that allow them to lead without being undermined at every turn. Respect must be given not grudgingly or selectively but fully, as a recognition of shared humanity and democratic values. Otherwise, representation risks being symbolic rather than transformative, with leaders constantly fighting for the dignity that should come with their position. The broader fight also extends to how society treats the collective, not just the individual. Attacks on one leader send messages to entire communities. When Jasmine Crockett is targeted, the insult is not confined to her, it resonates with those who see themselves reflected in her identity, who recognize the same stereotypes and hostility that they face in their own lives. This is why the fight for respect and equality is not just personal but communal. It is about protecting not only the dignity of one leader but also the dignity of every individual who identifies with the marginalized group being attacked. Each incident becomes a test of whether society is willing to defend equality for all or allow prejudice to dictate whose voices are valued. The pursuit of respect and equality also requires persistence. The backlash to Loomer's attack demonstrates that people are willing to push back, but the fight is not won in moments of outrage alone. It is won in the sustained commitment to dismantling racism in every form it takes. This includes the blatant, public attacks as well as the subtle, institutional barriers that persist in silence. Equality is not a destination reached through single victories, it is a continuous struggle that demands vigilance, resilience, and collective will. Respect must be demanded repeatedly, not just for individuals like Jasmine Crockett, but for every person who continues to face discrimination in less visible ways. The incident reminds us that equality is not about special treatment or political correctness, as detractors often claim. It is about the basic principle that every individual deserves to participate in public life without being diminished by prejudice. It is about recognizing that dignity should not be conditional, and that respect should not be negotiable. The broader fight for respect and equality is about affirming humanity in the face of those who seek to deny it, about ensuring that attacks do not silence voices, and about building a world where leadership, service, and participation are not tainted by the poison of racism.